Welcome to the final days. Today is March 29, 2019. Today we are going to see a full moon on a night when it should have only been 3/4 full. We will also see huge lightning bolts shooting down from the sun onto a celestial body between the sun and the earth. Additionally, we will watch a video of two suns setting in Alaska, a strange disappearing sun, and several other sky anomalies not mentioned on mainstream news. The purpose of this channel is to show the viewers that we are living in the very last days according to the Holy Bible, and to explain why this is actually good news and cause for celebration, explained later in this video. Most of these unedited images were obtained yesterday, March 28, from the Federal Aviation weather cameras in Alaska and Canada. Some were from a few days ago. For those of you who are new, these images are 10 minutes apart, forming a time-lapse video when strung together. Jesus talks about the last days in Luke chapter 21, verse 25, when he says that we will see signs in the sky. Before we look at the full moon that was viewed from Alaska 4 days ago in the very early morning of March 25th, here is a moon chart showing how the moon should have looked that morning. As you can see, a quarter of the moon should have been dark. Surprisingly, instead of 3/4 moon, the south-facing camera in Ketchikan, British Columbia in Canada, shows a full moon crossing the sky in the very early morning hours. After the moon rises, we see the sun crossing the sky. Then, just at noontime, we see a purple beam shooting downward from the sky. Last year, we saw this same purple beam on lots of FAA cameras. These are biblical signs of the last days. Here is another full moon viewed from the south-facing camera in Harris River Pass, Alaska. In this footage, we see the same bell-shaped object that we see in hundreds of daytime images during eclipses of the sun. These next few frames show a crescent on the moon shifting from the left side of the moon to the right side as the bell-shaped object keeps pointing at the moon. As the moon and the bell-shaped object cross paths, notice that the bell is always pointing toward the face of the moon, almost as if it is projecting a light onto the moon as it passes by. The darker crescent shape begins on the left side of the moon. As the moon crosses paths with the bell-shaped object, the crescent moon disappears. Then it begins to reappear on the right side of the moon. As we go through these frames, it almost appears as if the bell-shaped object is projecting a light onto the moon. Here is the bell-shaped equipment used during the day to conceal a total eclipse. This footage is from the Sitka, Alaska camera in December 2017. It shows a complete solar eclipse occurring and the bell-shaped object is present. The only time we see this bell-shaped object is during an eclipse. Thus, when we see this bell-shaped object at night crossing paths with the moon, it is likely our moon is being eclipsed by a celestial object. The bell-shaped object is used to help conceal celestial objects between the sun and the earth, such as in this footage from Misty Fjords, Alaska. The red crater-pocked planet is barely noticeable, but when contrast is added, it comes into view. Notice how large this celestial object is compared to the mountains in the photo. Here's an interesting solar event viewed from the east-facing camera in Prince Rupert, British Columbia in Canada. Ignore the vertical line, that's a type of lens flare typical on many of the Canadian FAA weather cameras. This footage starts out at 8:20 a.m. local time. Watch the thin bird feeder post over on the right as the sun moves behind it. The sun completely disappears. The reason for this is that we are not looking at the sun. In a minute you'll see what happened to the real sun, but first, here's the exact same thing happening in an older video of this same location. This footage was taken on March 3rd, 2018, so the sun is a little lower in the sky. And here it is again on last year's images from Burwash in the Yukon Territory. Here's an inset showing the real sun so that viewers can see that it would be impossible for the real sun to disappear behind a thin flagpole. And here it is again from the camera in Drumheller, Alberta in Canada, as the sun disappears behind a tiny street lamp. The inset once again will remind you of how big our sun actually is. It would be impossible for our sun to disappear behind a small street light. And for those of you who are new to this channel, I will quickly show where the real sun went. These images from the south-facing camera in Attawapiskat, Ontario in Canada show the sun rising up on the left, and after a few frames the sun disappears. It shrinks down to 1/5 its size. The actual sun has just gone behind a dark nebula. So we're not looking at the sun now, we're looking at NASA's artificial light source, which is very close to the Earth, and it's passing in front of a dark nebula. NASA's manufactured light is no match for the real sun, because you'll notice the landscape and sky almost look like nighttime, right in midday here. NASA's light passes over the dark nebula, tracking in perfect synchronization with the real sun. Eventually the real sun emerges from behind the dark nebula, and the sky and landscape suddenly brighten, and the sun resumes its normal size again. These close-ups of the same thing make it a little easier to see the detail. Many planetary systems contain a nebula. Since our solar system never had a nebula, this tells us that this nebula has been brought in with the planetary system that is now intermingled with our solar system, which we will be seeing more of in just a minute. It's set to arrive during the time of the biblically foretold Great Tribulation, which we believe is very close. So the reason our sun seems to disappear behind a thin bird feeder post and a flagpole is because you're actually seeing a manufactured light that NASA launched between the Earth and the sun, much closer to the Earth. During times when this equipment is visible, it shows up as a black dot, which casts its reflection upon the water surface, proving that it is an actual piece of equipment. The reason we don't see the black dot in the lower 48 states is because during those times when it would be visible, our skies are very heavily chemtrailed here. This black dot equipment is capable of producing a circular glare thousands of miles in diameter, such as these images from yesterday taken in Alaska. Notice how absolutely enormous this sun appears. This is NASA's equipment producing a gigantic circular glare in order to hide planets that are eclipsing the sun, which we will see in just a moment. NASA's manufactured light passes in front of these celestial objects while the real sun passes behind them, completely concealing these total eclipses, which occur multiple times daily from the far north. And we just saw the same thing happen with the dark nebula in Ontario, Canada. Here are some images from last March 2018 from a camera located at the military base just outside Anchorage. There are 3 objects setting. 1 is our sun, and 2 are from the planetary system that brought in the nebula we just saw a minute ago. As the sun approaches the horizon, another object is setting just underneath the sun. NASA's manufactured glare equipment spreads out the glare to completely engulf the foreign object from view. It does the same thing to another object over on the right side of the screen. The artificial light spreads out a glare big enough to engulf the object in an attempt to hide it from view. As you can see, this causes the sun to appear many times its normal size and very distorted. These are more of the signs in the sky that Jesus tells us will signal the end of the age. We as Christians are commanded to watch for these signs so that we are not ignorant of the very late hour in which we are living, and so that we can be spiritually prepared for what lies ahead and also help others to get spiritually prepared as well. The northeast-facing camera in Ketchikan, Alaska, shows a planet emerging from the glare as the sun rises in the east. At first glimpse, most people don't see anything. However, if we add some contrast to the area of the rising celestial body, we see it. The contrast works much better if no glare, sun, or white clouds are in the area of the contrast. That's the reason for the small patch of contrast. The northeast-facing camera in Metlakatla, Alaska, shows NASA's glare equipment flashing around 6 a.m. As the sun moves off the side of the screen, another celestial body appears, very faint in the atmospheric chemicals, but if we add some contrast, the object shows up. These close-ups of the same object provide a view of how fast the celestial object is rotating. This object is full of craters, which allows us to view the rotation. We know this can't be a lens flare of the sun because our sun only rotates once every 27 Earth days. This object is rotating much faster than that. Here is another celestial sphere caught by the southeast-facing FAA weather cam located in Ketchikan, Alaska. Once again, as we go through the footage, it is obvious that this celestial object is rotating much faster than our sun rotates. Thus, we know it cannot be a lens flare of the sun. Here are the same images with contrast added for better viewing of the rotating object. Here are some close-ups from the same images we just viewed. These close-ups make it easier to see the rotating of this red sphere. Thus, we know that this cannot be a lens flare. Oh, before I forget, please click on the thumbs up so that this video shows up in searches for other people needing this information. Thank you very much for doing that. Yesterday morning, the northeast-facing camera in Sitka, Alaska, caught a heavily cratered celestial orb rising to the left of the sun. As the sun moves off to the right, this object can be seen emerging from the glare. It's very difficult to see with the naked eye, but these close-ups with contrast added really help to bring out the details in this rolling object. This red sphere looks quite different from the one we just saw in the previous footage from Ketchikan, Alaska. This object looks much more heavily cratered. These three frames from the west-facing camera in Eldred Rock, Alaska, show a very large round object that the sun is approaching. We know this can't be a lens flare because the object is reacting to the sun as the sun partially illuminates it as it approaches it. A lens flare can never become partially illuminated because a lens flare is created from within the camera. In Willow, Alaska, the southwest-facing camera shows the sun passing by something huge. Once again, NASA's manufactured light is reacting to this object as the glare reaches out toward it, which tells us it cannot be a lens flare. These images were taken by the east-facing camera in Sandspit, British Columbia in Canada. Once again, ignore the vertical lens flare in these images. We see the sun coming up in the morning. Then suddenly, on a perfectly cloudless day, the sun shrinks, and the sky and landscape suddenly darken as if it's nighttime. In the next frame, the sun suddenly brightens again, and the next frame after this was removed, which we find very often. The next frame shows nighttime again. 2.5 hours later, it suddenly becomes daytime again. This can only happen if the sun is being eclipsed. During the biblically foretold Great Tribulation, which is very close, this system will get close enough to the earth to cause upheaval, described in the Bible's book of Isaiah chapter 24, verses 19 and 20, when he describes the intense shaking of the earth. As these objects approach, their gravitational pull has already caused disturbances in our magnetic pole structure, our tectonic plates, and the jet stream and other effects, the cause of which is never mentioned to the public. These problems will continue to increase. The sun is beginning to get lower as viewed from the west-facing camera in Chilkat, Alaska. We see two celestial objects, the one in the upper left corner, which is being blurred by technology, and another close to the middle of the picture. Even with contrast, the huge object in the upper left corner is very difficult to see. This celestial object is so huge that we cannot see the bottom of it. We know it's not a lens flare because it's being partially illuminated by the light. Essentially, it's reacting to the light. Last year, we saw a different but similar, huge beige-colored celestial object from the Hoonah, Alaska cameras. This footage is from last March 2018. The object is blurred by technology. As NASA's manufactured light gets close, it actually lights up this enormous object. Here's some contrast. If we go back and forth through these frames, it's easy to see that this object is being partially illuminated by NASA's artificial glare. As we move forth, once again, we see NASA's manufactured glare spreading out to engulf this unbelievably large object in glare in an attempt to hide it. This causes the artificial light to take on a very contorted shape. These are more signs and wonders of the last days. Untold trillions have been spent on the smoke and mirrors to hide this inbound planetary system from the public. The enemies of Christ do not want you to find out how close to the end we are. The enemies of Christ do not want you to turn your life over to Jesus before your time runs out. As the sun begins its nightly descent in Cape Fanshawe, Alaska, it is preparing to pass over another huge celestial object, which is very faint. I'll play the footage as it came off the camera, then I'll add some contrast when we view it again. Here are the same images with contrast added in order to view this large sphere better. Again, the contrast works better if it's limited to a small area rather than done on the entire photo. So that's why these patches of contrast look very odd. I've attempted to prevent getting the sun glare inside the contrast area. These last couple frames are very difficult to see the celestial orb because of the sun glare. But this gives the viewers an idea of the enormity of some of these celestial objects that are being hidden in the sky. I started to skip over this footage from the southeast-facing camera in Cape Spencer, Alaska, because it was foggy, but then I noticed something that looked like lightning or branches of plasma. In the next frame, I noticed the craft that always flies in front of a celestial object that creates either an eclipse or a near eclipse. Even with contrast, the planet is difficult to see. But careful examination of this photo does show a celestial orb behind the craft. We've seen this craft in lots of previous videos, so I don't really need to explain it. You can go back and watch it earlier. I'm not an astronomer, so I can't really explain what's going on in these images, but I can tell you that these are more signs of the end times. Here are 4 images spanning 30 minutes on the southeast-facing camera in Level Island, Alaska. Notice the small white ribbon in the sky. This is a short strand of atmospheric chemicals placed by a military jet. Even though the ribbon has blown a little so it's no longer straight, we can see a definite start and stop to this white ribbon of atmospheric chemicals. Many cameras have caught these jets turning the chemical sprays off and on as instructed. These chemicals are very deliberately placed into the atmosphere and are quite different from the old-fashioned contrails that jets used to have in the past. The west-facing camera in Tenakee Springs, Alaska, captured 2 suns setting. As we start through this footage, we see what looks like the sun making its way downward in preparation for setting. Then, 4 hours later, here comes another sun. NASA's manufactured light once again spreads out its glare to an enormous size to envelop the foreign celestial orb in glare in a feeble attempt to hide it from our view. As these suns go behind the mountain, we can see NASA's black dot equipment reflecting upon the water surface again. Jesus told us that we would see signs and wonders in the sky when the end was near. The technology created to hide the approaching planetary system has no doubt been accomplished with the help of the fallen angels, the demonic realm. The enemies of Christ do not want you to know how close to the end we are, so that you do not have time to repent and turn your life over to Christ before your time runs out. Screens at the end of this video instruct you on how to accept Jesus into your life. For faithful followers in Christ, this is all good news and cause for celebration, because Jesus has promised to remove those living in holiness from earth before the major destruction of the Great Tribulation begins. This is commonly called the rapture, which will take place quickly and quietly just before the Great Tribulation. In Luke chapter 21, verse 36, Jesus promises an escape from God's wrath during the Great Tribulation when he says, "Watch therefore and pray always, that you may be counted worthy to escape all these things that will come to pass." Jesus is referring to the Great Tribulation. He is saying that those who are counted worthy will escape God's wrath. To be counted worthy, we must be living in holiness. A link in the description box below discusses what holiness is and how to achieve it. These next few screens will tell you how to accept Christ into your life in the event that you are seeking Him. Simply pause the screen if you need more time to read the text.